And then for others who are on this meeting, this is a Town of Superior Finance Committee meeting, Tuesday, August 4th. Unfortunately, for the other attendees who have joined, and that's currently K3 right now, there's a Comcast outage which is affecting staff's ability to access some of the documents that we're going to be reviewing, access those and share those via Zoom. If you can get on the town's website, and actually it's through Granicus, but go through the town's website and access the meeting materials, that may be beneficial for you. So again, apologies for that. So this evening's meeting, go through the agenda quickly. We have on the agenda this evening a review of the Town of Superior second quarter 2020 financials. We are going to be looking at some long-range revenue forecasts. One of the items we'll be looking at what the implications will be on the comprehensive plan, and if in fact parcels identified to be developed in the comprehensive plan do not develop, what's the fiscal impact of something like that. Also under long-range revenue forecasts, we'll be discussing mill levy increase options, and associated with that are unfunded projects that potentially could be funded through a mill levy increase. We'll also look from a long-range capital planning perspective, a look at the currently budgeted 5-year and beyond capital plan. This is associated with the preliminary 2021 through 2025 budget. The board has not received that document yet. We plan to distribute that the week of August 10th. And when that's distributed to the board, then we'll post that document on the town's website for the public to begin reviewing as well. And then the final item on there is affordable housing and discussions of maybe some cost implications associated with looking at affordable housing within the town. And then under other, what I have are potentially agenda items for our next meeting. The only one listed on the agenda was tax incentives, but I think additionally, we'll want to look at COVID business grant effectiveness. But I think when we get to scheduling the next meeting, we can identify potentially some other agenda items. So for the two finance committee members on this call, any modifications to that agenda?
Nope. Looks good.
Okay, let's go ahead then and run in through the second quarter financial report. Jeff, do we already have this? I mean, it's obviously attached on the Granicus website, but do we have this downloaded to the finance page with the town?
Yes, it is also there as well.
Okay. This item is also on the consent agenda for the board's August 10th meeting. So, we'll get a couple of bites at this apple, but I'm just going to be going through what I consider to be the highlights of the second quarter 2020 financials. Jeff, please jump in if I miss something. But I think generally what we're looking at in this particular COVID environment is the town is faring much better financially than many other municipal, county, state entities. Through June, we saw our general fund revenues up almost 9%. We had budgeted about a 5.3% increase. The primary reason for that is sales tax receipts remain incredibly strong. They're up 16% over 2019. We had budgeted only a 2.4% increase. Really, the reason behind that continues to be, I think, to some degree, with some businesses shuttered for a period of time, restaurants in particular, but some businesses shuttered or having limited ability to have clientele now with some of the Governor Polis' stay-at-home orders in place. We've seen strong sales at our five primary businesses, which account for roughly 70% of our sales tax. So with our discount grocers, our grocery stores, and a liquor store in town, those are really the driving factors between strong sales tax revenue for the first half of the year. We have seen about the only revenue source we've seen. Well, we've seen a number of revenue source with lower than budget receipts year to date, but the material one is vehicle use tax. I think we talked with the board about that when we had the initial COVID discussions, but similar to analogous to the 2008 Great Recession, that was one of the first revenue lines to be impacted, people purchasing fewer vehicles. And we're seeing that in this particular case. We are down in that particular revenue line 25 to 30%. And that's based on a budget of $1 million. So down $250,000 to $300,000. But the increase in sales tax revenue, order of magnitude, vehicle use tax revenue generates about $1 million a year, sales tax revenue about $11 million a year. So the 16% increase in sales tax revenue is more than offsetting the 25 to 30% decrease in vehicle use tax revenues. So we
Just real quick, I assume that forecasting out for the rest of the year, we're not going to anticipate any uptick in that either for the vehicle and use tax revenue. That's probably the vehicle revenue will stay flat, or I assume negative. Is that
right now we're assuming that it does stay at that deflated level. Now, last month's vehicle use tax receipts were markedly better than the month before, but Jeff and I have been around long enough to know that 1 month, especially in vehicle use tax receipts, does not make a forecast. So we're continuing with the relatively dire forecast. Conversely, just let the board members know, or the finance committee members know, we're not anticipating, obviously, that the 16% sales tax increase will remain or will continue throughout the year. Anyone's guess is as good as mine, but we're anticipating, that revenue stream to drop, and by the end of the year, maybe more at the budget levels. But the spike that we saw in those particular receipts for the 4 months, essentially March through June, are in fact material. So that has helped us out this year, and for planning purposes, and we went through this with the board, I think, in reviewing the first quarter financials. We also have some other favorable financial policies that put us in relatively good shape. The first of those being that the town has a relatively robust conservative general fund reserve policy, where we reserve about 75% of prior year expenses on an annual basis. So we have roughly $8 million reserved in the bank for unforeseen situations. So that's positive. We talked about the retailers, the strong performance from those particular retailers that may in fact moderate, but we shouldn't see any material negative decrease in those particular retailers. And also a point of note is, and this is getting a little bit down in the weeds, but revenues generated in the Superior Marketplace, there's a portion of those revenues, roughly 40%, and I'm sorry, the Superior Marketplace encompasses the Costco Target side of the road, as well as the Whole Foods side of the road, roughly 600,000 square feet of retail. There is a roughly 40% of the revenue generated within the Superior Marketplace is going back to the developer, Brixmor, to pay for some public infrastructure. So any increase in revenues that we're seeing, that'll be split 40% with the developer, or with the owner, I'm sorry, of the shopping center. But conversely, if there's any material drops in revenue, the Brixmor also will take a burden of that particular drop. So because of those particular factors, we're feeling relatively solid as it relates to, obviously, not only finances through the second quarter, but through the balance of the year. We're not anticipating any materially negative impacts, which will require draconian actions by staff and the board.
So Paul, I mean, just to play that out, I know there's no forecast in here, and I think that's just a personal, thing that I like to see, with respect to revenue or even expenses, whether it's on a quarterly go forward basis or whatever. But just looking at revenue, we're at 16% over, the budget. Even if you assume that it sort of abates, even though, the worst of the COVID sort of pull ahead might be behind us, even if we get to say 10% over 2019 versus a 2.5 that was estimated, that at 10% you're talking an $850,000 increase in revenue over budget, which is significant. At what point do we start thinking about how do we use that, or what can we start changing? And this is personally, I do like to see sort of an updated forecast on a quarterly basis, because I think it gives us the ability to make decisions quicker rather than sort of waiting to see what happens. If for example, if our revenues were coming in at the other end, maybe we could have pulled back on spending. Right now, if revenues are coming in high, are there some projects that we want to try to pull forward potentially, that we can capitalize, where a lot of the workforce might be underemployed, where we might be able to get a better deal, so to speak.
And really that picture will become very clear to the board and to citizens when we distribute the budget. In the budget document, which will come out in a week or a week and a half, we will have estimates for all revenue lines, all expenditure lines that we can see in context. So effectively, the budget is projecting roughly a 12% increase in general fund sales tax revenues. So that's just a precursor of what you'll be seeing. But again, remember, the general fund, which is revenues are roughly $14 million, roughly 55% of that revenue comes from sales and use taxes. What you will also see when you see the budget is we have building activity, even though it's above 2019. This is essentially not only new construction activity, but reconstruction. Anytime someone pulls a permit for a deck or a basement refinish, those type of revenues and expenses. But building activity revenues are materially below what we have budgeted. So I think the net impact we will see in the preliminary budget is general fund revenues actually are going to be down by a couple $100,000 over what we had anticipated, primarily with sales tax being up, but building revenues being down. So just to keep it in context there.
And that's fair. And I think we have taken some action, by killing a lot of events this year. The pickleball court is 75,000 below budget. I think CAPS is underspending by 100,000. 88th Street, I think, is coming in right around budget. So if you take all that, it'd be good to know. My only sort of frustration is we've got to wait until September before we start thinking about where we're at. And it'd be nice to kind of get a flavor for directionally where do we think we're going to be, given that we've taken a lot of cost cutting measures back in April, and how do those roll forward, and do we need to get a message out internally to continue to tighten belts on some activities if we think things are going to start turning around.
Sure. So a couple of takeaways I have from that is, we'll look at, modifying these particular quarterly reports to include some sort of annual forecasting to give the, board members a sense of, how this will extrapolate on an annualized basis.
I think that'd be great. And Sandy just texted me. She's actually on. She's on as a participant. She couldn't get the attendee link. So I don't know if you can promote her to a participant or a attendee or whatever the difference is.
We will promote her to a panelist right now. So she should be a panelist. Thank you, Neil, for that clarification.
And then before we leave, revenue, the one thing I did want to ask you about on expenses, the 220,000 grants, obviously that's going to get refunded, but the Boulder County Sheriff, the extra 350,000, and I may have forgotten, but what is driving that with respect to more payments in 2020?
It's just really a timing issue. I'm just going to state the facts. Boulder County in the past has been delinquent typically in sending us invoices. So last year, through 6 months, they sent us 4 months of invoices. Bless their soul, they're on top of it now. Now they've sent us 6 months of invoices. Okay. So even though we pay $340 more, it's going to even out at the end of the year. So, not anything to worry about. And then as Neil noted, and I just want to reiterate, is, we have some additional expenses, at this point, $220,000 in business grants associated with COVID-19 that we are anticipating to get reimbursed through Boulder County. So and you'll see that in the budget, and we'll talk about that in the budget as well. But if you're just looking comparing 19 expenses to 20 expenses, those are the primary reasons why there's a difference, and they're explainable.
Paul, real quick before we leave those, the $220,000 for the business grants.
Yes.
I'm assuming that it'll get reimbursed by Boulder County through the CARES Act and what we approved back on the June 29th meeting in entering that. The town was, I believe, is expected to be reimbursed. It was $567,000 through that. Are we projecting to have expenses up to that amount? I think when the memo came out, we only had about $250,000 worth of COVID-related expenses. So are we actually projecting that we'll reach that amount that we're allocated through Boulder County and the CARES Act?
Clarification for our viewing audience: the CARES Act funding that rolled through the state now it's going to be allocated by the county, and the distribution formula is that we get a little over potentially over $500,000 in expenses to be reimbursed, but we will obviously only be reimbursed for expenses that we incur. The report that the board received, I think, from the manager a week or two ago, identified that we were about at $250,000 in expenses. Jeff and I were having some dialogue with some of our operating departments. This is primarily Parks and Rec. We're doing some enhanced weekly cleanings of playgrounds and playground areas. Those expenses aren't in there. I think, Jeff, we just saw some invoices come in for about $40,000 for the first few months, and we're looking at weekly cleaning expense of another $6,000 that we'll be doing over the next several months. Is that generally correct?
That's correct. That's the magnitude, about $6,000 a week.
So, that will add potentially another $100,000 to this. We continue to do enhanced cleanings for our facilities. We do have town hall. We do have individual staffing town hall. We do have it open to the public, and we do have additional disinfectant cleanings happening there as well. So, right now, Ken, if I were to estimate, I'd say it looked like we might get up to $400,000 worth of expenses.
Okay, that's good to know. When we get further down in the agenda where we discuss our long-range forecasts on unfunded projects and whatnot, I've got some additional questions to that regard, but I'll hold them for then.
Okay. So went through, and really the summary document that we provided looks at our primary operations. So we talked about the general fund. Quick discussion on water is our primary town business, or otherwise known as an enterprise operation. Revenues, I think, for that particular operation are actually down compared to the budget, but a big factor with water revenues is we've got roughly $6 million in anticipated water revenues this year. Excuse me. About $3 million of that comes from monthly, essentially utility bills, consumption bills with our residents, with our businesses, with our irrigation customers, and then roughly another $3 million for one-time development fees for new construction. We're anticipating, obviously, with the hot weather that we saw early in the season, to meet our service fees or our monthly billing revenues. What we are behind on are our one-time capital revenues. We anticipated, like I said, it was about $3.2 million. And the budget document you'll see will estimate those revenues at $1.7 million. Again, that is something that I always talk to board members about not being too concerned about. Really, it's timing of development, and really what has happened this year, and it's the same development as of last year. We're anticipating Superior Shores, which is the development adjacent to Bell Flatirons, or the apartment complex off of Colton. We anticipated that development to begin connecting to our system and paying us these system connection fees this year, and that will now be delayed until 2021. And then on the expense side, actual expenses this year compared to last year are materially lower, but again, I wouldn't get too excited about that because that includes capital expenditures. So last year we had a large land acquisition for $700,000, and that's really the difference between this year and last year. This year's expenses, and then I'm just kind of flipping through the document that I wish I could be showing you, but there's some new graphical summaries in this particular document that hopefully would help someone take a snapshot look at revenues and expenses. So I'm on, for example, page 5 of the second quarter financial document, where we have just a snapshot summary of sales tax revenues. The first bar being 19 revenues, the second bar being 20 revenues. And as we talked about earlier, 20 revenues through May. And again, we're 2 months behind on collection of sales tax revenues. So May revenues, are materially higher than not only 2019 May revenues, but also our particular budget. So again, a good story there. The next page is just a graphical summary of what we talked about on the general fund revenue side, where 20 revenues are above 19 revenues, but you'll see they're a little bit below budget. And again, most of that because of building activities are down a little bit. But again, over the 5-year period, those building activities will catch up.
Hey, Paul, just a quick question, and I will let you not answer it if you don't want to. With the library cut its budget by, I think, 20%. We contributed our full amount. Has Louisville expressed any desire or inclination to refund us our over contribution?
No one has spoken to me about it, but I would anticipate it would probably be at your level or the manager's level and not at my level.
All right. Well, just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
It's good you have that on your radar, Trustee Shaw. Page 7 goes through the similar snapshots of general fund expenses. So again, you'll see expenses through June this year exceed expenses through June last year. We explained that through the COVID business grants and the timing of payments to the Boulder County Sheriff. We're, in fact, though, below budget here because with less billing activity, and we have less billing activity revenue, we contract out our inspection services. So essentially that contract is written where they get a portion of billing use tax revenue. So if the revenues are coming in, then they conversely are not billing us, obviously, for the inspection work. So there's a benefit there. Page 8. And so those are the new charts that I don't think you've seen before. Again, it's just instead of us talking about it or reading about it, I know some people are more visual, so that's just a different perspective of ways to look. But I would, summarize it that with COVID-19, yes, revenues are down, but expenses are down actually a little bit more than revenues. We are in a good financial position. We're not being overly optimistic as it relates to revenue projections for the balance of the year. But again, that's this discussion. We will go into much more detail when we review the budget document.
Hey, Paul, real quick question. Looking at page 7, the general fund expenses through June 2020, in the table on the lower part of that page, looking at the legal services line item, we are below 2019's level by 47%. Is that again just a billing issue and we'll catch up, or what? Why do we have such a large deviation in our legal services expenses?
So there are 3 components of those legal services. Town legal counsel is the biggest component of that budget or that expense line. But also we have expenses associated with our oil and gas efforts, as well as the help me out, Jeff. Gable House,
Rocky Flats. And
Rocky Flats.
And I think what we had, and I don't have this in front of me, but I think what we had is we had higher Rocky Flats expenses as well as oil and gas expenses in 19 compared to 20. That's probably the material difference. There may be a timing issue where our legal firm has billed us maybe for 1 less month than they have in the past, but I think the primary factor are those 2 other legal expenses that we have in that line.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on some of these, visual charts or any other, just general discussion on revenues, expenses in our larger operations, those being the general fund and the water fund?
No questions from my side, but I do appreciate the visual representation. I think it's helpful.
Good. Well, we'll plan to continue that as well. A lot of the additional information in the document, I mean, there's another 20 pages, but a lot of it is just takeaway information. We try to provide, not try to provide, we provide a summary of all the capital projects that staff and the board are working on. And, you know, it's a pretty exhaustive list, and it's a time consuming and it's a material part of what staff does and what encompasses the town budgets. So again, we'll work based on a recommendation by Trustee Shaw of maybe getting some estimates in there, but traditionally what we have done with this particular summary is we identify the project, give it a little bit of description, give a budget, and then when the project is done, then we'll populate that fourth column of final cost to give the board, you know, ultimately where we're standing against the budget. But we'll look at providing, you know, some additional information as it relates to what our estimated costs are throughout the year as well.
Yeah, and that'd be great. I mean, even if it's a simple column with, you know, forecast, you know, July forecast, you know, and I use pickleball as an example. I mean, it's obviously not completed, but we have a contract signed for $325K. So that's, you know, materially 75 below what we had put in the budget.
It is to help manage expectations specific to that project. We had to do some over excavating work. We had to bring in some fly ash. So we aren't going to realize the savings between the initial contract and the budget, but you know, hopefully there will be savings.
Sure.
And then following the summary of all the, like 3-page summary of general capital projects, we get into some of our smaller funds. I mean, by law, we have to budget for lottery revenues in a different operation. So for example, on page 11, you'll see something called Conservation Trust. Well, those are effectively our lottery revenues and how we're budgeting and spending those monies. Class 1 is the enhanced landscaping we have throughout town, which is funded with the roughly $30 a month charge for every home in town. I think open space is pretty self-explanatory. You know, the big activity there obviously was the CenturyLink purchase, and just to remind the board, that's something that we did not have budgeted, so we will need a budget amendment for that. And there will be other budget amendments, but just kind of giving you a heads up, after you adopt the 2021 budget, then we'll ask you to, probably the following meeting, go back and we'll do some cleanup, for the 2020 budget for these budget amendment items.
Hey, Paul, real quick, while we're talking about the purchase of CenturyLink, for the open space debt service, and this is on page 12, where we talk about the debt service amount, and that's covered by the 0.3% dedicated sales and use tax. Is the 0.3% sales tax collection sufficient to cover our annual debt service payments, while also covering the costs that we've typically paid with our open space funds on an annual basis? Or are we going to be shifting some of those costs that we've been using our open space funds to the general fund or some other funding source?
Quick question to that is, any open space related expenses, debt, operating, maintenance type of expenses are covered by that 0.3% tax. Just a general kind of 20,000 foot overview, that revenue generates, you know, $1 million, $1.1 million a year. Debt, with the 06 debt issue that was refunded, combined with the new debt service, is about $660,000 a year. So there's a remaining $370,000 a year to cover maintenance expenses, water. In the years that we get a BOCO youth corps group or two, we typically have them work on open space projects, so that is expensed there as well.
Okay, and as far as you know, that $300-ish thousand that's left over, have we been having that level of expenses that we've been paying for maintenance annually, or are we going to go over that and have to use a different funding source as well?
We are not. Typical maintenance expenses are in the realm of $100,000, $125,000 a year. And again, that's associated with local youth corps expenses, some watering expenses on some of the open space properties that we have, other town maintenance expenses in our third-party contract. Vargas do some work on those particular properties. And then to give you a flavor of the 2021 budget, then we're anticipating obviously some additional maintenance expenses associated with CenturyLink property. Not knowing exactly what we're going to do there, we thought it'd be prudent to include a line there for maintenance expenses, but all of those are covered after the debt service is paid by that 0.3% tax.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
I wasn't really going to jump too much into, some of these other funds that we have on page 12, page 13. A lot of these are what are known as clearing accounts. So all the revenue, all the sales tax revenue generated in Superior Marketplace comes in and then ultimately goes out. It goes back to Brixmor and it goes back to the town. Same thing where within downtown Superior, this is the property tax revenue that's generated in that particular entity. A lot of that will go back to the metro districts so they can pay the debt service payments on the bonds that they issued for infrastructure improvements. And a little sliver of that is shared with Boulder County, with Boulder Valley School District, and with the fire district. But the vast majority of that property tax revenue comes to the town, and then Jeff sends it to the district so they can make their debt service payment on their outstanding debt. On pages 13 and 14, we talk about the Superior McCaslin Interchange District. This was created almost 20 years ago to help build improvements at the interchange of McCaslin and Highway 36, as well as doing maintenance in that surrounding area. The district is funded by a 0.16% sales tax. And just for the board's reminder, we'll be talking about this again during the budget meetings. That 0.16% ends after 2022. It generates about $500,000 a year. And then in addition to that sales tax, there is a property tax that supports maintenance, capital, and debt service for the interchange. We have been materially lowering that property tax rate over the years. And after 2024, when the debt goes away for the interchange improvements, we will be looking at another material decrease of that property tax rate for those businesses within the marketplace. Continuing on then on the utility operations, and again, we walked through some discussion on the water. You'll see some graphical information on page 15 of the document as it relates to water revenues. And again, why, so through June, that the bar of 2020 actual compared to 2019 actual on the top of page 15, we're above 2019, but we are not at budgeted levels. But again, that is representative of the fact that the development activity, the one-time connection fees, where we budgeted $3.2 million, is anticipated to come in at about 1.7. But again, the anticipation is what we don't collect this year, we will collect over the next several years. No material issues on the expense side for either our water operation, but as well as our sewer and our storm drainage operation. And on page 16, we just have a representative snapshot of water expenses, which are water being the largest of those three town businesses. And you'll see that we're below in 2020, below budgeted levels. Why 19 had spiked was the $700,000 land purchase that we have in 19. And just so you're reading that graph on page 16, you see it spiked dramatically at the end of the year in November. What that represents is about $1.5 million debt service payment, which we will be paying through 2025. And again, similar then to what we saw on the capital project summary for the governmental operation and some of those other lottery funds and things of that nature, beginning on page 17 through page 19 is a summary of the capital projects for our water, sewer, and storm drainage operations. Then, following that capital summary, if you haven't looked at numbers closely enough, you'll see essentially pages 20 through 28 is what I would call a summary income statement. So it just comes straight from the town financials. We summarize the information. The town financials, if anyone's interested, be it finance committee members or attendees, it's always available on the town's website. So you can look at the detailed town's income statement, but what pages 20 through 28 attempt to do is just summarize that information because it can be a little bit tedious. So I don't really have any specific comments on any of those items. I think we covered the big picture items in the narrative discussion that we had earlier, but we certainly are, Jeff and I are here to answer any additional questions you may have. Hearing none, seeing none, let's continue with the agenda. So agenda item number 2A, is something that's titled Changes Vis-a-vis the Comprehensive Plan or Parcel Discussions. And I'm going to summarize this, and please clarify this as it needs to be clarified. But I think there was some discussion or interest or dialogue as it relates to, we have this planning document that the town goes by. It's called a comprehensive plan. And we're in that comprehensive plan, it talks about certain parcels in town and what their underlying zoning is and potentially what their ultimate development may be. And if in fact that does not come to fruition, development consistent with the comprehensive plan, what are the ramifications to the town's long-term finances? That was kind of my understanding of what we wanted to talk about. Does that need additional clarification?
No, I think that's kind of what I was thinking. Go ahead.
Well, I guess I can jump in and say, you know, if you read the comprehensive plan, it talks a great deal about how important it is that we have the balance of commercial and residential. Well, obviously we are insanely top heavy on residential, and we just continue to give away more and more commercial, 300,000 square feet of commercial up on CenturyLink. I'm not saying it was the wrong thing to do, but what I really want to understand, I don't care about the residential. What I care about is what is the ongoing revenue we're losing from this commercial. I'm not talking about one-time tap fees. I mean, commercial pays user fees. Commercial could pay a variety of things. We've taken almost half of what was supposed to be commercial space out of business. It ain't going to happen. And what's that impact going to be on the town when at one point in time it was part of our revenue model?
Thank you, Sandy, for that clarification. So just a little bit of background on commercial and how we factor that in and what the impact would be if in fact a commercial development does happen or doesn't happen. Let's take CenturyLink as an example. And I included for the board and then for anyone else who's viewing this, I thought a relevant document, perhaps not too relevant, but a relevant document would be, we produce as part of the budget process revenue projections associated with approved developments, the developments which the board has approved. And what this document, and it's titled Fiscal Impact / Revenue Summary of Development Projects on the budget. And what this document attempts to do is look at the net fiscal impact of a particular development. Now, most of these developments, as Sandy has already referenced, I think, are residential developments. So we don't really have a good, just isolated snapshot of what commercial does or doesn't do for the town. So I'm going to try to summarize that very, very briefly. But when we look at commercial activity within the town, we look at, I would say, essentially two types of activities. One is retail activities, and one is essentially office activities. And for example, I think when we would look at modeling the impact of CenturyLink, we would have looked at that as a office complex. And really, revenues generated from office buildings directly are limited to property tax revenues. And again, commercial development within the state of Colorado is taxed based on 29% of the valuation of that particular property. And then there's also some ancillary revenues that help our utilities. They're ongoing monthly service fees for water, sewer, and storm drainage. But those are relatively, on a per capita basis, or a person occupying a commercial building versus occupying a home, those don't generate a material amount of ongoing revenues. They do generate some, but not material. So the big revenue generator is property tax. Now, when we look at commercial non-retail developments, there are some ancillary benefits. If you talk to most economic development directors or experts, their primary motivator in town is to generate good jobs within town, and then everything else falls after that. If you get good jobs, then you will get quality housing, and then with quality housing, quality retail will follow that. But the ancillary benefit from good jobs here in town is, we have a small factor, and it's based on an ICSC study that was done years ago that assumes that obviously people here in town, coming to work here in town, will spend some of their lunch money in town. They'll go to some of the local stores and spend some other money, but again, it's not a material amount. But then conversely, when we look at a development, any development, we look not only at the revenues being generated, but the expenses to serve that particular development. And obviously a quality Class A commercial office building, we're not delivering hardly any services to. It's not generating calls for service for the police department. It's not putting additional tremendous burden on our Parks and Recreation department. So the expenses are relatively low associated with that. So that's one category of commercial. The other category of commercial is retail. And that can have a very positive impact to a rather marginal impact. And I think we talk about this typically in the budget process, but if we're looking at new retail here in town, essentially all the new retail in town is not going to be necessarily a net new retail. We may get, and the analogy I'll use is, we might get a new small grocery store, say for example, in downtown Superior, and that would be fabulous to provide that amenity to those to those residents. But what it also will do is it will cannibalize sales at the existing grocery stores that we have here in town. So we'll go through some degree of maturation or some analysis to determine if a retail establishment is coming in. Typically, we assume it's going to have some level of cannibalization, but there'll be a net positive impact. So Sandy, in that particular case, I think that type of development typically, if in fact we're planning for it in the comprehensive plan and it does not happen, that would have a little bit more material negative impact on our revenue forecast. But again, right now in our longer term financial planning model, other than a little bit of new retail coming in downtown Superior, as well as maybe an additional hotel that will generate some additional revenue, there's not a lot of net new revenue associated with commercial in our long-term financial plan.
So, if I were to do a bake-off, so to speak, 1,000 square feet of home versus 1,000 square feet of office, the relative value of those 1,000 square feet is not going to be different, but the tax rates are going to be, significantly different because of the Gallagher switch or the Gallagher allocation. But then, and that's just at the property tax level. And then you take that the next level where you were, the relative amount of impact on town services is going to be diminished as well. So, from an operating margin perspective, office square footage is significantly greater value to the town's bottom line. And I think, from the perspective of what Broomfield is doing, I mean, they're literally throwing an incentive to a company that's going to add 75 jobs. It's like 25,000 square feet of office space. Mm-hmm. That is, in the grand scheme of office space, that's not much. And I know we're going to talk about incentives, but, and I think this is where, what Sandy was trying to articulate or maybe by sacrificing office space on that parcel, what have we limited ourselves to in terms of future revenue, growth opportunities elsewhere if we don't have the office coming forward in the parcels that we have? And, I take it one more step forward and, what do we need to throw at these folks to try to get office here?
Right, and that will be a good discussion to have in our next meeting with Adam and others. And you brought up Broomfield, and Broomfield, I mean, you talk about that particular incentive. I can vividly remember incentives for 3,000 square foot for job creator meat storefront in town. They'll do it on a very, very small level, but I think they're relatively consistent in that any type of job generator, assuming it meets some minimum average annual wage requirements, they'll consider giving it an incentive. And I think we need to have some discussion on is that money well spent or perhaps not. But it sounds like we'll have that discussion next time. So Sandy or Neil and Ken, obviously also, what additional discussion can we have about this now, or what can perhaps we prepare for you to continue this discussion at our next meeting?
I guess I wish I knew. That's why I'm not a finance expert. But, I read in the comprehensive plan that if we don't develop all these things, it's going to basically screw us over in the future. And yet we've given it all up, kind of getting the message from you, oh, well, there's not that much impact on us. Well, then why did we say it 10 years ago if it wasn't something that we thought was important to do? So, it either was important or it's not important, and there has to be some sort of an impact that we don't have that. I mean, first of all, when you don't have 300,000 feet of office space, that's less people to come shopping in our retail space. That's less people going to Target and buying things. It's less people going to Costco. So there is an impact when we take this space out, because it decreases our attractiveness as to the retail market that we do have, because there's nobody here in the middle of the day to shop. And we've given all the space away. So there has to be some way to quantify what the loss is. Now, 300,000 feet of office space, we don't know those people would have gone to Costco once a week and shopped. But you can have some sort of a projection of some of those people would have gone to Costco and shopped if we had developed that. So what is the potential impact that we've lost people who might have, we had to have had it as a projection that it could have had a positive impact. Obviously, it must have a negative impact if we can't do that now, because the reality is a lot of people in Superior, except for in the last 4 months, are not here during the day. I'm a prime example of it. I work in Arvada. So I'm not here to shop at Costco or Superior. I shop at the Costco in Arvada. So that's the piece for me, that there has to be some way to quantify what that impact is that we've given away hundreds of thousands of feet of potential office space. And what does it mean? How many people might have been in that space? Is it negligible? I don't know. If it was the partners group, those are people that made a lot of money. So, there has to be a way to somehow look at what is the impact of what we have either purposely given up because we took prime commercial space and turned it into open space, or we made a conscious decision and took space that should have been retail and turned it into residential. And those people, some of them will shop here, but I happen to be over in Louisville at the hardware store on Monday and ran into 3 citizens of Superior because we don't have a hardware store. So, there's got to be an impact on our future revenue projections because A, we've given up all these office workers who would have shopped during the day, and B, we've given up space that could have been retail. Maybe it was an Ace Hardware, not a Home Depot. There has to be a way to somehow quantify what we've given up.
I suppose from my perspective, I'd love to see us quantify this, and I think that'd be really helpful. But I think there's kind of a takeaway message to the board as a whole that we need to keep our eyes on the whole development ecosystem and where we are in Superior's life cycle right now. That we know that we struggle to support businesses, restaurants specifically, because we don't have the offices, we don't have the daytime clientele or the clientele that leads into happy hours to support those. So we need offices, and anytime we give up any commercial for residential, we lose out on that. So anytime we allow a zoning change that reduces any commercial or office space, we're just sealing Superior's fate that much further. So while I would love anything you guys can pull together, Paul, that helps build those arguments, I think the onus just has to be on us to convince our colleagues that a zoning change away from anything that can provide office is not in Superior's best interest. But I'm 100% with you there, Sandy.
Yeah.
And maybe
the corollary being, we need to incentivize businesses to come into Superior because they're not, they're getting better deals elsewhere. So we need to think seriously about what can we do to attract what's attractive to an office to come into town.
and Paul and Jeff, scenario modeling is as exciting or as boring as you make it to be. And I think start at the basic level, just property tax comparison, 100 or 1,000 square feet of a home versus 1,000 square feet of office. Here's a property tax difference between to the town, and then just start layering on some of the ancillary revenues or decreased expenses that sort of help to perpetuate the relative impact that commercial space can have to the town financials. And I think we can look at that, and relative between the two, there's a delta. Commercial's worth this, residential's worth this. That delta is effectively what we should be looking at offering for any sort of commercial development, because we can sell every square foot of space in town for residential, and I don't think it'd be hard. But if we want commercial because it's better for the benefit of the town, let's sacrifice everything above the revenue we'd be getting for residential, because that has ancillary benefits to the other businesses in town. I mean, I think that's really, for me, that's really the piece of it, is simplifying it to, what is commercial space worth to us versus residential space. And we haven't been having those discussions because we haven't been having that trade-off discussion when we're asked to rezone. And I get it, with an FDP, you're not technically allowed to compare one to the other, that's fine. But I think, having those discussions in advance of an FDP, so we have some economic boundaries of what, retail versus commercial versus residential is worth to the town's financials.
Thank you for all those comments. We actually have that information. I don't have it in front of me, but, we have done analysis on the CenturyLink property, for example, and and I'll dig up an old model that we have that exactly, quantifies the revenue associated with that. And then on a, whatever we want to look at on a square foot basis, it should be a relatively easy comparison to look at compared to residential. And Sandy and others, I did not mean, if I came across, to say that, hey, I'm cool with this commercial development going to open space. From a financial perspective, I'm not cool with that. We need to continue to focus on diversifying our revenues. And one of the best ways to do that is with a commercial quality office development. We need to have sales tax, and sales tax of 5 primary businesses, not be the primary revenue source. We need to, take little bites and have property tax be a little bit more of our revenue stream, so we can be a financially sustainable community for decades or centuries in the future.
Okay, thank you. Because it keeps me awake at night. It literally keeps me awake going, what are we going to do when we have no more residential space to build? And we've built everything residential. And now what do? We got nowhere to build an office. So, nowhere to build those people who are going to be here during the day. So anyway, glad you worry about it at least a little bit.
Yeah, we do. So again, I think if we can give you some hard data, then that will help to facilitate this discussion, and help the discussion as it relates to, development or consistent or not with the comp plan, as well as tax incentives. So we'll certainly work on that. So any other points of discussion? I, of course, buried my agenda. There we go. Any other points of discussion on that item, or do we want to start talking about agenda item 2B, mill levy increase options? So this particular agenda item talks essentially about, I think some of the background information that you received on this has identified that currently we can assess or charge a mill levy up to a little bit over 12 mills, and we're currently charging a little bit less than 8 mills. So we have roughly 4.2 mills of additional property tax revenue that we can charge. We do not need a vote to do this because it's annually what we identify with county is county. We have 12 mills which we can assess. Oh, by the way, this year we want to do a temporary 1-year mill levy credit of 4 years to get our net mill levy down to below 8. If we elected to, we could do without a vote to capture that entire little over 12 mills, which would generate on an annual basis a little over $1 million. And I think you've seen the impact on what that does. 1 mill does for a $500,000 home. That would increase the property tax bill by $36. For a $500,000 office development, that would increase it by 36 times 4. It's about a 4 times differential, so about $145. So what we included for your review, the first document is from an entity called Hilltop Securities. They're the town's financial advisors. They're the ones that have helped us tremendously over the years, including this year with all the debt issues that we have done. But they provided a summary, theoretically, of what revenue could be generated from a bond issue associated with these 4.2 mills. So I think that was the first 5-page attachment, and that could generate upwards of, I would say $15 million in bond proceeds. And then I think the second discussion associated with that is, well, we don't obviously raise taxes here just to raise taxes. What could we utilize those funds to do? And so the second attachment is, I think, titled an unfunded projects report. So between the development of the 2021 budget, as well as just projects we've had floating around for forever, we provided the finance committee with a unfunded project list of, did I not total that one either? What is that, Jeff? Is it the 14 million bucks plus the $36 million? So 50 million bucks of unfunded projects?
Yes, that would be correct.
So that was the second attachment there. So so there you go. There's the foundation on that, and let's discuss this.
So I think I've been fairly vocal on this topic in the past, over the past year or so, and my biggest concern going into this, and first, Paul, I appreciate you guys pulling this together. This helps the conversation a lot. But my biggest concern is looking at the fact that we haven't been collecting what we have been fully authorized to collect is that's great, and I know our residents appreciate it, and we should never be taxing our residents more than is necessary to provide the services. But this nagging fear in the back of my mind is we are setting ourselves up for failure in the long term, and probably long after any of us are here. But looking at some of these projects, some of us will still be here when these come up and need to be worked on. But by not collecting everything we're authorized, we aren't going to be able to actually deliver on services that our residents need. So I think this list of 52, roughly almost 52 million, we'll call it 51 million dollars in unfunded projects really helps put that in perspective. In my mind, we probably shouldn't have been under collecting for as many years as we have, and I think this is something we should be adjusting in the future, and that's what I'll be continuing to push the rest of the board for. Now, what's clear is as I go through all of these projects is not necessarily all of these will or even should come to fruition, but even if we say half of them shouldn't come to fruition, we're still talking about $25 million that we don't have to support these. One thing that I heard when we discussed this, I believe it was at the last retreat, is there's concern about bumping up what has previously been collected to what we are authorized to collect in the midst of COVID-19. And is this the right time to do that to our residents? And I think that's a really valid concern. And I've been thinking about how do we overcome that? How do we balance the need to somehow figure out how to fund these unfunded projects versus adding additional financial stress to our residents and to our businesses? Now, where I ultimately landed is we've already done a lot for many of our businesses. We have the $220,000 in economic incentives that we put out this year. So from a business perspective, we have already issued grants that will more than cover what our annual increase would be if we charge our full or assess our full amount of mills. Now, from a residential perspective, that's where I kept getting caught up. However, I don't know how many of you receive or read the Colorado Municipal League magazine. I think it's called Municipalities or Colorado Municipalities, something along those lines. Anyway, in this last issue, there was an article about how different communities are responding in different ways to COVID-19. And there was a section about how various municipalities in Colorado are specifically providing financial support to households. So for instance, it cited Pagosa Springs allocated $50,000 in $200 Visa gift cards to individuals who have been laid off or who can show that their hours were reduced. Glendale was providing Target or King Super gift cards. Estes Park established a community relief fund. So there's a lot of other things we can do out there to help bolster those in need that can't necessarily afford an increase in their taxes if we were to fully collect our authorized allocation. So my initial thought is that if we were to establish a program such as one of those, and let's assume that we are looking at like $200 gift cards, similar to what Pagosa Springs did, that covers what a typical $500,000 home would see in their property tax increase. That would be $151,000 or $151. So they're still going to have a net benefit of $50 beyond what their taxes will increase if we were to do something along those lines. If we were to do that on a household basis and assume there's, say, 1,000 households that are interested in apply and get approved in a program like this, that's $200,000. And this is where I come back to our conversation from earlier of how many what's our level of expense that is related to COVID-19. And if we were to do something like this, could we get reimbursed by Boulder County through the CARES Act funding? And it sounds like we do have some room there, that if we were to set up a fund such, or a program such as this, it would alleviate the burden or strain of collecting our full amount of taxes, but B, we'd also be able to get reimbursed a certain amount of it through the CARES Act. So those who really need the help get the help, but it also gets the town back on the right track to collecting the amount of funds we need for the unfunded project. So that's where my head's at. Obviously, the challenge is if we were to do a program like this, how do you administer it? What are your requirements? Who actually does the review? If we're talking about 1,000 households, that's a large burden on staff time. I'm sure we're talking actual full FTE there that might be needed. So there's a lot of other considerations, but in my mind, I was trying to work through the concerns I heard through the other board members, but still get us going in the right direction.
Ken, that's really good perspective. I've approached this from a slightly different way, in that I was very emphatic at the retreat that there's no way that I could support a tax increase, in 2020 or 2021. For a lot of the reasons I said before, just given a lot of the uncertainty that people are seeing. And I think you laid out a couple of things which I want to separate out just a tad. One is we have a big reserve. We have a reserve that's there for a specific reason, and it's to deploy it at times that we need to deploy it. Our reserve has been growing for about 14 years. We haven't truly dipped into it. We have a large reserve policy, 75%, which is significantly greater than a lot of our communities or neighboring communities. So if you say, for example, let's raise taxes in 2022, let's fill the gap with the reserve in the interim. In parallel, I don't disagree that we should pursue every federal dollar that we can secure for our residents, irrespective of tax increases, or the like. If there are federal dollars that the town is more set up to secure and potentially distribute to the folks in our community that are hurting, let's go do that. And I don't want to tie that back to a potential tax increase as a potential offset. More of, let's go help them in any way, shape or way that we can. I do agree that, looking at this unfunded list, we have a massive budget hole, but the flip side is the fiscal impact revenue summary that Paul sent out. Our TAP fees alone, if they come to fruition, will cover almost all of that. So it is difficult to look at, the unfunded list and then the TAP fees, or rather the one-time fees, and say that we have a revenue hole, because one could argue that we don't. I do agree that we should be collecting the taxes that we can. I'm just really leery of doing that when we're sitting on 9 million, will be 9 million at the end of this year of budget surplus, so to speak, and a forecast that shows another 30 million in one-time costs that are going to come in. So it looks like, from the 60,000 foot view, that financially we're okay right now. And I think that's probably been the perspective that past boards have taken and allowed themselves to reduce the mill, because right or wrong, we've got a fairly optimistic view of residential development that's going to bring in a fair amount of revenue from TAP fees. And we've seen this, even as Paul already alluded to with Q2, things are pushing out. So if this pushes out, it makes it more difficult. So I'm talking around like a big giant circle or square or rectangle, and what I did say before, I am not opposed to a revenue increase to the town, leveraging the mills that are available to us. I'm just a little leery of the time that we do it. And I want to look at the other levers that we have for securing the revenue, whether it's, one-time TAP fees, raise water Sandy will probably kill me, but let's raise our water fees. Our water fees relative to Parker or Castle Rock are half of what they are. So let's look at all our revenue options before we anchor on mills, because they're easy. And while doing so, let's also look at our reserve. We've definitely allowed it to grow. What's wrong with deploying 4 or 5 million of it next year, specifically here, to augment that gap between now and basically COVID Valley of Doom, to where we can start seeing things rebound economically for the majority of our town?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to using the rest of our mills. I am opposed to us saying we have $52 million in unmet needs. I mean, first of all, let's look at this seriously. There's $15 million on there for a community center, and there's another $5 million on there for an indoor pool. The indoor pool is probably part of the community center. And who even believes we're going to do that anytime soon? I mean, we're using a list that isn't even a viable list, that we're saying, oh, we have 52 million in unmet needs. Let's look at the things that we have to do. We have to maintain our roads. That's an essential thing. And then there's things on here that I'm just saying, oh, additional outdoor sand volleyball court. Well, if it's used as much as the volleyball courts used up at Wildflower Park, that's a savings right there. Let's get that one used before we go build another one. So I'm fine with us saying we're going to use those mills, but absolutely under no circumstances do I think it's appropriate to say we have $52 million in unmet needs. I mean, that's just wrong. We need to look at the things that we have to do, and then what are the things that we might like to do. Right now, we're spending $6 million, give or take, on 1500 Colton. There's no way that I have the nerve to go ask somebody for an additional $15 million to build a community center, when we don't even know that that building's going to be completely filled for the need. And then when we also have indoor space in downtown Superior, that's 15 million that could probably come off that list right now. So, you know, I'm fine with us looking at the mills, but let's not tax our folks when we have no specific plan on how to spend the money or where we want to spend the money.
I think those are valid points, and I agree. Using $52 million as just a general high level amount would be misleading. I think, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the intent was just to create a list of everything that's ever been talked about and that could be floating around. That way we at least have our high bound. I mean, when I look at this list and we look only at street projects, and Sandy, I agree with you. That's where we do have essential needs. We need to make sure that our infrastructure is up to date and our infrastructure can be used. I mean, we've got nearly $15 million listed here in unfunded street projects and reconstruction costs. So even
and
if
there's nothing on there for McCaslin. I mean, if you look at this list, and I assume we have to pay to maintain McCaslin. We certainly spent the money to do the upgrades down by downtown Superior. What about the rest of the road?
So Sandy, just as a clarification there, if we have a project budgeted and McCaslin is budgeted for improvements, that's within the budget. That's within, for example, the next document, we'll talk about the capital plan through 2025. And then anything not on that particular capital plan, be they wants, be they needs, you know, just projects that have been identified over the years, that's what is on this $50+ million project list. So McCaslin's included in the budget.
So I think where I'm still landing is that I see nearly $15 million in street projects alone. We do know that our pools are definitely nearing their end of life, and we'll probably have to do some significant investments there and thinking beyond that. So, I mean, we still have enough unfunded investments. What I'd like to circle back to is, Paul, can you speak to Neil's comment about the tap fees and whether or not those are already built into the budget, or do we truly have that amount of tap fees that are just sitting out there that could cover these unfunded projects, or just provide a little more context there?
Yes, I can certainly do that. So the projects you're looking at in front of you at the $50 million list are what we would categorize as governmental projects. They have nothing to do with the utility system. That's an important distinction to make, because the point that Neil made, and accurately so, that, you know, currently we're anticipating $31 million in one-time revenues associated with the development activity over the next 5 years. The majority of that money, and I was trying to add it up in my head, but, you know, over 20 million of that probably is for the utility projects that you'll see in the budget. So the one-time revenues, governmental revenues, used to be things like building use tax, some of the impact fees for school impact fees, park impact fees, that $10 million ish, maybe a little bit less, is already factored into the budget document to fund our existing capital program. So did that help?
Yeah, so I guess just to feed it back to you to make sure I'm understanding, basically those tap fees are built into the budget, and while there might be some excess we'll receive over what's built in, it's really not going to be enough to cover even say the $15 million in unfunded street projects we're looking at here.
Correct. And additionally, just, to be quite frank, we cannot spend water tap fees on a street project. Water tap fees need to be spent on our water infrastructure.
So I guess that just brings me back to I'm still not seeing a way that, to reframe where I'm at, I don't want to raise anybody's taxes. I don't think any of us want to do that, but I want to make sure that we are making those responsible, hard decisions to make sure that we are still setting the town up in the future, once none of us are even on the board anymore, to have the funds to be able to construct the roads that are needed, to continue to allow the residents to achieve the quality of life that they've come to expect from this town. And I'm seeing that our decisions to not collect our full authorized tax amounts are not meeting that end goal of setting up the town for that future ability.
And Ken, I 100% agree with you. I look at where we're headed as a town. The list, while probably exhaustive, as we sit down and probably take things off, other things may come onto the list, just by virtue of the basic process. And I do completely agree that we do potentially need to seriously look at increasing taxes. For me, it's just ultimately a question of when. And, I think the other question that has been floating around is whether or not we bond against that. And I think early on, I was pretty excited about, sort of pulling in $15 million and getting to deploy that all at once. And I think possibly I'm backing off of that in the sense that, we do have a long list here, but I'm not necessarily in favor of rushing a $15 million investment in the town. And that maybe, and we can debate the when on the 4 mil increase, whether it's 2021, 2022, probably till the sun comes up. But fundamentally, I think, if you just look at a 20-year forecast for the town and what we need in terms of infrastructure improvements, we do need the free cash flow. And I think I got sideways on the revenue impact spreadsheet here. So I think that was a great clarification in that, the one-time fees are really, they're not incremental revenue. So we really can't use those to fund some of these other unfunded list items. So the mill levy that we have, I'm all in favor of pursuing that probably in 12 to 18 months. But I really do want us to think as we get into the 2021 budget of deploying that reserve to start plugging that hole that we have and use it for what it's there for.
And I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it.
I was going to say something else. Go for it.
All I was going to say is, I'm sure this will be part, obviously, of the budget discussions that we'll be having over the next several months. And again, just for clarification, spoiler alert, the budget that you're going to see does not include any mill levy increases, no property tax increases. It keeps all our tax rates at the same level that they are now. Well, actually, we're reducing some of the tax rates within the interchange district, but we're not increasing any tax rates.
Thanks, Paul. So I think a takeaway, Paul, for you all is knowing that I think you said it was roughly $400,000 of anticipated expenses that we'll have related to COVID-19, and we'll get another roughly $150,000 that we can get reimbursed for on that. What is the best way to make sure we are using all the federal funds that are available to us, whether that is something like what I threw out there as an idea of supporting our residents, or if there's something else we can be doing, that's something I want to make sure doesn't slip through the cracks. If there is some way, if we don't have any better projects, then I absolutely want to, that are related to COVID-19, I absolutely want us to pursue something can help our residents through this time. And again, Neil, I didn't want to conflate the two of a meal levy increase and COVID-19, but the fact that it looked like we had some wiggle room in there to tap those funds just helps lessen that burden if we do. So yeah, I fully respectful if we don't want to conflate those two.
No, but I think it's a valid point ultimately, and I hadn't read what Pagosa Springs or others had done, but I think, if we can avail ourselves of federal funds and be the funnel by which it gets deployed, fantastic. Because, what we did for the businesses here, the 220K, none of us knew it was going to get reimbursed. The fact that it did, fantastic. But, I would have still made the same decision to deploy the funds irrespective of the reimbursement. And I think all of us on the board feel the same way. So, if we can, pursue another way to grant money to our businesses or residents that is ultimately backstopped by the federal government, let's absolutely do that. Because talking to some of the business owners in the Brixmor complex, their landlord did not help them whatsoever. We provided a lifeline, as did the federal government. And I think that is absolutely a great role for us to play. And if we can do that again, leveraging federal funds, fantastic.
So I actually had 2 notes of follow-up that staff will look into. There's some level of ambiguity as it relates to what expenses are reimbursable. So we will, the county is administering that. We will work with the county. We'll chat with them here over the next period of time and see what their thoughts are on reimbursement of those type of expenses. And my understanding, I haven't looked into this in detail, but my understanding of this first phase of CARES financing is it's only through December of this year. So we'll need to look at the timing of this round and who knows what, if any, may be identified in the round of financing that Congress is discussing right now. So we'll look into that and provide and get some information for you on that.
I think that's great. I mean, I think what we've also seen is the town of Superior financially is in far better footing, having come through COVID or during the COVID pandemic, than a lot of our neighbors. And to the degree that we can use that to benefit our residents and businesses, let's do it.
Okay. Any other discussion on this particular item? So the next item we already alluded to, and our internet's back up. I don't know, Jeff's trying to see if he can get connection so he can share his screen. So we'll let him work on that. And if you can, Jeff, go ahead and do it. But we have put together the proposed 2021 through 2025 capital plan. And these are all the projects that you'll see in the budget and all the different pots of money that we'll be discussing in the budget process. So again, these are all funded projects with existing revenue sources, with no increases in any of our tax lines there. So there's the background on this particular attachment. And again, this just may be a takeaway for you to kind of get a jump start on the budget review. Sandy, in particular, you were asking about where's McCaslin. Well, that is line 17 that you're seeing on the document there in 2021. That's that $3 million. That's to start with some McCaslin improvements.
And Paul, just to clarify for anybody who might be following this at home, like using the US Bikeway as an example, the 1.2 million on there is not exclusive to a town of Superior contribution. That's the total cost of the project. And the cost of that is going to be split between us and federal funds, and I think there's some other things on here where we're augmenting our own funding with other funding to get to the total number. Is that a fair representation?
No, that's absolutely appropriate. This is just carved out information in the budget. It has no revenue information. So there are a number of projects. That Bikeway project, the original town undergrounding project, line number 11, that is a project that we are planning to split 50-50 with Excel. So there are a number of these projects that do have revenue offsets associated with them.
And Paul, since you did highlight line 17 there, can you correct me if my memory is just serving me poorly? Haven't we normally done street replacement projects on an annual basis? And are we switching the way we are? Are we not doing full replacements anymore? Or why are we seeing a decrease in 2023 and 2025 in the amounts there? Or is that just a product of what the streets are actually working on?
Well, all of those and more. So yes, in past years, we have done typically a large street project each year. I think a few years ago, a handful of years ago, 4 or 5, we didn't. But a lot of those street projects in the past, similar and more recently, the work we are doing right now on 88th, as well as the work we did last year on Colton, we essentially ripped out the entire roadway and rebuilt it, you know, what we call a full depth reclamation project. The program we're looking for in the future, a number of these streets we're hoping we don't have to do the full depth reclamation. We're hoping just to do a mill and overlay as well as some utility work on the McCaslin Street project, for example. So the scope of the projects are hopefully changing, and they're not as expensive. Obviously, the takeaway from that is a full depth reclamation, reconstruction of a roadway is much more expensive than the standard mill and overlay. So we have some of that going on, and then we just have demands for other projects creeping in. So, for example, let's look at 2023. Well, we do have a road project there, and I can't remember off the top of my head what exactly that is. But then additionally, we have a second road project above on line 13, and that's the extension of Promenade to 88th Street. So, you know, in some years, we have some either material additional expenses in a year, 2023 being an example, or in 2022, we have, you know, instead of a road project, we have our contribution. I'm sorry, that $1.25 million is our contribution to the undergrounding project. The total project cost is in excess of $2 million. We're starting at $2.5 million with Excel, you know, paying for the rest. But we do have some other projects that are essentially, you know, competing with some of our street projects. But I think, again, we will go into probably more detail than you want to hear during the budget process. And Alex will talk about PCI ratings and pavement ratings, and, you know, and really what this program looks like, and it'll help the board to, you know, make some decisions, obviously.
Gotcha. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. And I look forward to Alex's explanations. I in the back of my mind am wondering, is it because of the roads are in better condition we don't need to do this, or are we trying to then save money to allocate otherwise, and are we saving money in the near term to put ourselves in a worse position in the long term by maybe not getting as much useful life out of these roads, and we'll just have to invest more sooner. But those can all be questions that we talk about during the budget process.
Yeah, Alex will be ready to discuss those. So, you know, we saw the list before this, the unfunded projects list, and it wasn't a needs list. It was just a list, needs, wants. But then conversely, I think the takeaway I want folks to have, and I think all of you have this takeaway, but we continue to invest material amounts for our particular infrastructure. And first and foremost, that's typically where we spend our money, is investing in our current infrastructure. But our 5-year capital plan for the town of Superior is, you know, over $78 million. So it's a material continued investment in existing and in some cases new assets. And you will get many more bites at this apple beginning with the budget process coming up. So any other comments or takeaways or follow-ups that staff maybe will need to do before budget review time specific to this item?
I think, and I don't want to go too far in the weeds. I think one of the challenges we're going to have relative to Parks and Rec is the master plan completion is going to straddle the board discussion on the budget, and it's going to be relatively difficult to sort of prioritize what might come out of the proposed master plan and how we want to allocate funds for a calendar year budget. Just a warning, not needing to have a discussion about that yet. I know that happened with CAPS, and we just kind of threw in a plug number, which then has created its own China challenges. And I want to try to avoid that if we can, but I'm not quite sure how to do that.
Great. Thanks, Neil, for those comments. So then the final agenda item, I'm going to move on to agenda item number 4, affordable housing. I know there was some dialogue at the board level with this, specific to the last development review project of Saharius, and even before that, obviously, and some discussion as it relates to affordable housing in Superior and how that looks. And one factor associated with that is the cost associated with building a new single-family home in town, and and I think we would get comments back from folks building these particular homes that because of some of these one-time fees, it's then difficult to recover that, if not impossible to recover that cost, if there's some level of deed restriction on the sales or affordable housing component. And in many of the municipalities around here, as they look at affordable housing and looking at ways to enhance it in their community, to be honest, they look at maybe some relief with some of these fees. So this is just intended to be a takeaway on a single family home, typically what the sunk costs are to connect to our utility system and to pay their initial impact fees and use taxes associated with those properties.
So the first question is just how do the utility one-time fees compare, not just with Boulder County, but with Broomfield and Jefferson County? Like, and you don't have to answer that now, but I mean, it'd be good to know how these numbers fit in the greater Denver area, because as people are priced out of Boulder County, they're going elsewhere. Is that just because the starting price of the home is lower, or if what is this, about 8% of the cost of a $500,000 home is just consumed by fees? So it'd be interesting to know how they compare.
And we can certainly get that to you, and Neil, as I think all of you are aware as well, it's not only these one-time fees, but, a lot that drives home prices are land values as well. And land values, where we are a little bit different than land values out east of 25, for example.
Yep. Because I know, one of the perspectives that an applicant has made is, they'd like to see paired tap fees. So effectively, I view that as cutting it in half. And if we were to look at something like that, say, make it $15,000 per home, or not, I guess I can't even do math right now, make it $13,000 per home, $12,000 per home. Can you tie that back to, we'll only do that if the home is priced at less than $400,000 or $300,000 or whatever the price point? Has anyone done something like that to where they've dropped the fee for a specific reason or specific target market in terms of diversifying the housing stock?
And again, that's something we can look into, and then I think Adam, with his expertise, should have some insight on something like that as well. So we'll note those items for follow-up discussion as well.
And just yet another question, so when you're, these are, I guess, for single family homes, but when you're building sort of, say, a multifamily home, an apartment complex, are the fees different, or is it per building? Looking at just water, because it's the biggest number on here, how does that number get sort of quantified if it's a building with 3 units in it?
Boy, Neil, you ask all the right questions. So let's use Superior Shores as an example of that. That's, again, the townhome development off of Tyler and Colton in the kind of southeast part of town here, where those are attached units. Yes, we will make some distinctions as it relates to how large the units are from a bedroom and bath perspective to modify both those water and those sewer rates. And then the storm drainage is based on amount of impervious surface. So typically a townhome type of complex will be charged half of that anyway, about $1,600. Sewer charge would probably drop to either 0.75% or 0.9% of that particular number. And then the water gets much more complicated. It's depending upon how it's plumbed. If each individual unit has its own water service, its own 5/8 inch line, then that water charge would be something closer to $18,000 or $19,000. If in fact on a complex like that you're talking about, a 3-plex, 4-plex, 5-plex, that they do a master water meter, and instead of a 3/4 inch line, they put in an inch or an 1.5 inch line, the price of that increases. I think an inch tap may be something close to $65,000, but if you're then able to service 4 units from that, then it's $15,000 per unit. So that's too much information. I apologize, but typically on something less than single family homes, those fees are less as well.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, what this suggests to me, at least, if we do want to pursue, I don't want to call it affordable housing, but attainable housing or something that's priced lower than what's coming up in downtown Superior, I think we got to get potentially creative about some of these fees.
I think we do. And then what I would talk to you all about the board from a cost accounting perspective, that is if we're doing something that is not going to lessen, we're going to build a home, we want it to be affordable or attainable, and that's admirable and that's great. But just because we call a home affordable or attainable, that's not going to lessen the demand that home has on our water utility system and our sewer utility system. It's still going to require the same little sliver of the plant capacity to treat the water. It's going to require the same type of sliver from our water rights portfolio. So I think from a strict cost accounting perspective, I would say we've got to make the utilities whole. And if we're thinking about doing this, then the general fund needs to step up and subsidize this program exclusively. But that's for discussion down the road.
No, that's a really good point of view. No, I actually, that's really important. Just cutting the fee doesn't decrease the demand.
That is, thank you. You articulated what I was babbling about there. Thank you, Neil. So we've got a couple of follow-ups on this. We'll look at, we do have some summaries on one-time fee connection comparisons with surrounding entities. And then we'll involve Adam in discussion as it relates to, dropping the fees and, kind of limiting the housing prices to become more attainable, and, really how others have handled that or tried to quantify that.
So, excuse me. So were you saying, Paul, I'm not sure if I understood it, that you're going to do some comparisons on what's happened with other smaller sort of, so for example, Summit at Rock Creek, what kind of tap fees did we pay here? Because I know we have one water bill for, it could be as many as 6 or 7 buildings. Are you going to try and help us see what we paid? Now, obviously it was 20 years ago, so it's very different, but are you going to try and give us some comparisons on, because literally I have no idea what a house in Waterford pays in a tap fee compared to what I paid, at least so we have more of a apples and apples to look at when we're giving consideration to people like Boulder Creek Builders.
Sure. I think, Sandy, what I would propose is, I'm not going to try to go back and extrapolate maybe what some old single family homes paid compared to some, attached townhomes. But what I will do, and we do this for developers, I will get a summary together that if, what you're seeing in front of you, the cost that someone's going to pay for a single family home. And conversely, we can estimate what these costs would be for some of the attached product, for example, we see down at Superior Shores. And I think that, I'm hoping that would then be information that you could look at and say, okay, well, I'll use this as an analogy. RTD, on that RTD site, there's been some discussion of repurposing some of the parking or keeping the parking intact and putting in maybe some condominium type of units or apartment type of units, and maybe have some of those be affordable. But I would give you a price as it relates to, well, what are the connection fees for an apartment complex, for a townhome complex, and for a single family home? And then we could, evaluate from there. Does that sound reasonable?
I think so. So you're saying what you would do is take apples and apples right now.
Yes.
So
'Cause
for example, you would get the Summit at Rock Creek and take a building of 7 units and figure out how many bedrooms there might be or bathrooms, and at
Yep.
least come up with something that, the water bill for that building was, because I know we can get that information for you. So we could at least have a little bit more compare, because I see that one of the we homes is really more comparable to a townhouse in the Summit at Rock Creek.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I've had some dialogue with a neighboring municipality who has approved We Homes, who has had them built, and has looked at water usage for those We Homes. And at least the interior water usage is more similar to a single family home versus a townhome. So that's just, another bit of information for you to understand. And if that's the case, if they're using similar amounts of water that a single family home is, and they're, demanding a similar portion of our water treatment plant and our water portfolio for those particular We Homes, it's at least information that the northern community has given me, that the water usage of those We Homes are similar to single family homes, just for your information.
Okay. So, but that's what you're going to try and give us. That would be helpful. Yes.
Yeah, we'll give you some kind of categories of different housing types, detached and attached, and some general fees that would be associated with that.
Okay. Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay. What else on this particular item? Okay. Then the next agenda item that we have is, I think we're getting near the end of the meeting as it relates to next meeting. Not only, generally when, but some of the topics for the meeting. And obviously, similar to this meeting, we can finalize those later. But right now, I had some potential agenda items as tax incentives for future discussion. Also, the effectiveness of the COVID-19 business grants, and we'll probably have Adam do some follow-up with some of the individuals who receive those particular grants. And as one of you, Neil, or I don't remember who mentioned this, but yeah, the message is that we heard as well that Brixmor really didn't do a lot to help their particular tenants, and the money that the town provided was beneficial, for those particular businesses. But we'll ask Adam maybe to drill down and try to get some metrics or some quantifiable data from some of those business owners. So those are a couple of agenda items. So, I would just ask you over the next, several weeks or several months to, think about this. And as we get close to finalizing a date, we'll need to finalize an agenda as well. So unless you have any other items you'd like to, consider right now for the next meeting.
I've got a couple. So as far as the effectiveness of the COVID-19 grants to the businesses, Paul, in your opinion, and talking to Adam or whatnot, you guys think that is a topic that's better suited for a meeting in 2021 or later? That way we have a better idea of the effectiveness, then I'm fine pushing that forward. It doesn't have to be on the next one. So I'll let that be within your own judgment. but and I think Neil touched on this a little bit earlier in our town financial position. But if we were, say, in the private sector right now, and we're looking around at everybody else who's in our market, so for us, that'd be other municipalities, and we see that they're struggling financially, and meanwhile, we happen to be in the fortunate position of a very strong financial position, we'd be looking at expanding while everyone else is retrenching and taking advantage of opportunities. And while we aren't necessarily competing with other municipalities, we are to an extent for on economics and trying to bring people in. So to piggyback on Neil's idea of incentives, is there something that we can bring forward from an incentive package that we might not normally consider, but because of our strong financial position relative to our direct competing municipalities, is that something we can and should consider? That way we can actually land a landmark strong office user or something along those lines. And then also just broader, is there anything else we should be considering to pull forward due to the just impacts of COVID-19? Are we seeing construction costs go down, which I don't think we've seen that yet, but if so, should we pull forward some construction projects, or is there any, I know you guys have been absolutely fantastic about getting debt refinanced, but considering the low interest rates right now, is there anything we should be looking at from either debt financing going forward to bring forward a project, or refinancing anything? So just a broader thought exercise of given our relative financial strength and how COVID-19 is impacting anything, should we be altering our strategy for expenditures going forward? And then another one that I don't know if I don't know how so I'll just put it out there. One of the things that has obviously been contentious over the past couple of years is the decision to bring Tesla in and approving that FDP. And a lot of the conversation that I heard during that approval process wasn't necessarily revolving around the impact that Tesla would have from a tax revenue standpoint, but the draw that they would have to other businesses and other retailers and what they would do. I don't know if that's appropriate for this venue. I don't know if there's still any way we could quantify whether, if we were to go back to a post-mortem on that decision. I know if I were on the board back then, that would have been a difficult decision for me. And if something like that comes forward, I'd love to have additional, I guess, just analysis in my pocket to see if the board based their reasoning on sound judgments at that time. So again, I don't know if that's something that makes sense in this venue or what, but just putting it out there.
And that one in particular, I think we would have to have kind of Adam take the lead on it being closer from an EcoDevo perspective. But, I think that one gets, and just thinking off the top of my head, gets a little bit subjective, as it relates to that analysis. But we'll think about it. We'll chat with Adam about it and update you as we get closer to finalizing the agenda on, we think this is a good idea. This is generally what we want to talk about, or, no, maybe the timing isn't right, and this is why. So let us chat with Matt, chat with Adam specific to, a couple of those items, and I want to comment briefly on the tax incentive. And I hear what you're saying, Ken, that, we may be in a little bit better position financially to offer incentives compared to our competitors. But it's kind of a chicken or egg thing. I guess what we did with the initial incentive package was we developed that back, kind of in the Great Recession timeframe. We had no one in mind, but we identified an incentive package to try to, get people interested, to let them know we're open for business. We have tax incentives, and we've never really utilized it. So, do we just add on to that particular package and hope that it'll bring someone in, or, or do we tailor the incentive package, obviously, once we've landed someone. So that's, I think, going to be part of the discussion as well.
Okay. And just another comment about the Tesla idea. I do want to be respectful of the fact that they are a business in town, and I don't want to be dissecting the decision to necessarily revolving around them. So it can be a more generalized discussion as well. It doesn't have to be specific around Tesla, but just the general thought process of the value of what a retailer like them could bring, rather than direct tax and tax revenue.
Right.
Paul, I don't know if you see it on your screen, but one of the attendees has their hand raised.
Okay. What is the Finance Committee's preference here? So Brad Walker has his hand raised. What Finance Committee members would you like to hear from Mr. Walker?
I think it makes sense to follow the same 5 minutes that happens at our regular board meetings. I believe the Transportation Safety Committee does that as well. So I think that'd be consistent with other board subcommittees.
Okay. Sandy, Neil, you good with that?
Yes.
All right. We're allowing Mr. Walker to talk. Mr. Walker, if you could, looks to me like you may be muted. There you go.
Sure. Good evening. Brad Walker. I live in the town of Superior. I just wanted to say I appreciate all the work you guys are doing. I've been listening, and I would say collectively we're gluttons for punishment, because only someone who likes to be punished with numbers could like this stuff. But it's important, and I think I think it's important, and I just want to say thank you for the work. So.
Thank you, Brad.
Sure.
Thanks.
Hopefully you were able to hear that, because I'm working remotely in another state, and my internet connection is not the best. So it sounds like we're all having some collective problems there.
Heard you loud and clear. Appreciate it.
Okay. Well,
Thanks,
you
Brad.
folks have a good night. I'll unmute myself, but I appreciate the work.
Very good.
So what are folks thinking about timing for next meeting? We're looking kind of 3 months-ish out from here. Let me back up a step. Let's talk about budget review process, because that's going to monopolize some of your time. So we, within the week of the 10th, we'll get budget information out to you. Mid-September, we will try to schedule a couple of, more lengthy budget review meetings. Typically, they've been about 3 hours in length, and we've needed 2 of those to review in-person budgets. I don't know what this virtual environment is going to do to the budget review. And then after those September meetings, we're looking at a October 12th, I believe it is. I don't have a calendar in front of me, but sometime close to October 12th as the evening where we are going to hopefully adopt budgets. So that's kind of generally what the next 2 months looks like from a budget perspective. So, keeping that in mind, what are your thoughts generally on next Finance Committee meeting?
I'll throw it out there. If sort of the end of October, gives you enough time to put the Q3 financials together, that time frame, at least on its surface right now, seems to make sense.
Yeah, Q3, Jeff, through September, it might be better if we could, sneak into the next week like we did this time here, maybe kind of first week of November. But then I think we're running close to election cycles as well, so that comes into play too. But
I was going to say, one of us might not be here anymore. So
let's let Jeff and I look at that last week in October and see if we can give you a quality document, to be cognizant of your time as well in the review. So let us shoot for that end October timeframe.
Sounds good.
And then it sounds like we'll try to do it kind of, obviously not the front end of the week, not Monday at least. And, we'll just, look at the dates later in that week then. All right, what else do the finance committee members, what else would you like to discuss this morning?
Checked all my boxes.
Nothing else
All right.
now.
I do want to say that I find these meetings to be incredibly helpful, and I appreciate the time and effort that you guys are putting into this to prepare these documents and to have these quality conversations. Not knowing exactly what all these meetings would entail, what the content would be when we voted to create a finance committee, so far I would say this has been, at least from my perspective, well worth it, and I appreciate the time you guys are putting in to make these meetings as valuable as they've been so far.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll echo what Ken said and just add, I mean, this gives us a number of people the chance to get in the weeds. And I think, in some cases the weeds matter. So really helpful.
Well, great. Well, thank you everyone for your time this evening, and we'll see you soon as it relates to the budget reviews.
That's good.
Have a good night.
Night.